You're listening to Veeam Partner Perspectives with Eric Doherty.
Welcome to the Veeam Partner Perspectives podcast. I'm Eric Doherty. My guest today is Michael Cade, the Field CTO for Cloud Native Solutions, particularly Kasten K10. Michael, welcome to the show. I'm really glad you're here. Can you share a little bit about your background and your current role with us?
Hey Eric, yeah, thanks for having me for starters. I'm a global field CTO is the posh title, but ultimately I'm a technologist and have been for the last maybe 6.5, nearly 7 years. I've been at Veeam actually for just over 8 years, and I started off as an SE in the UK team. And prior to that, I was very much focused around storage virtualization at one of our distributors, Avnet, which is now been folded in, but that's a much longer story. So yeah, I very much come from that infrastructure background. And then over the last couple of years, my focus has been around all things cloud native, cloud and DevOps, bit of open source in there as well. So very much this new and upcoming advanced technologies, if you will, or emerging technologies is another thing that I know we call it internally as well. So yeah, and it's kind of like learning on the job over those last 3 years around, well, what is a container? What is Kubernetes? What is Kasten K10? Why did we acquire them? Why did we look at that instead of building our own? And I guess we'll get into a lot of this today, but yeah, I think it's important to note that I'm very much from that operations background, that infrastructure admin, sysadmin, vSphere admin, that I know you obviously a lot of people listen to this from that angle. So that's kind of my intro into this.
Yeah, you did a cool thing. I want to bring it up because I thought it was really cool. Your 90 days of DevOps project. I thought that was really cool. I followed along with that. Didn't have time to do my own 90 days. It's on the list. But yeah, why don't you explain a little bit about what that was and what you gained from that?
Yeah, so a big part of my role is about like helping the community or being part of the community and learning in public. And I've done that for years around things like virtualization and little things that you find in your home lab, and you wanna repeat that, you wanna record that, whether it be video that seems to have blown up or whether it's a blog post type thing. So 90 Days of DevOps was really me filling in a lot of the gaps that I had when it came to things around DevOps and the principles and processes around that. And it started out as a blog post on Kasten.io. So if anyone wants to read that, if you do a search for Kasten and you go, so you want to learn DevOps, if you look at that was the content driver for 90 Days of DevOps. And then as you do on New Year's Eve, just going into 2022, I had that thing of, oh, okay, that first 3 months, and I've done fitness challenges around that first 3 months of the year, like everyone else, but I thought, how can I incorporate this into a work project? And we were still very much in lockdown. I travel a lot for my work, but obviously the pandemic was just coming to an end. So we were still very much at home. So it was like, okay, how do I build some projects that allow us to educate the community or at least somewhat live? And I have a motto around, if it helps one person, it's worth doing. So hopefully it's up at 23,000 stars at the moment. I'm hoping it taught someone something. And I think the biggest thing that we saw was in the industry is a lack of structure when it comes to learning all this stuff. There's an overwhelming amount of new stuff that people need or want to know about. And there just isn't enough time in the day to master them all or have a good understanding. So what I wanted to do was put that structure together. And then that continued to this year as a successful project. But instead of me doing it, I went out to the community and got some subject matter experts that know more about things than me, and they wrote their own sections on things like secrets management or OpenShift, but with a flavor around DevSecOps this time. We'll see what happens next year. It's a hell of a lot of writing. It's a hell of a commitment. I have lots of ideas, but yeah, that's that in a nutshell.
Well, as somebody who's out in the community and consuming it, I appreciate it because it really is cool and it is motivating me. Because actually, one of my things that personal, I actually out of spite with this test, I do want to get my CKA. I've taken the test twice and did better each time, but still not good enough to pass. And part of it is I'm not in it day in and day out. A 90-day program like that would certainly get me closer to that goal.
Yeah, and it's surprising as well, Eric. Right? Like, so, and I hate using the term traditional, so I'm not going to. But Kubernetes DevOps is just a bolt on to what we've already been doing. You think of the industry today and how teams are getting smaller because of rifts or because of streamlining or whatever corporate spiel you want to call it.
Operational efficiencies.
Yeah, there you go. But teams are getting smaller, and we have to do more with less. And the way in which we do that is we can do that via automation. And DevOps equals, at least to a certain degree, as a simplification, is a lot of automation. How can I make life easier by automating things away? So I think I see a lot more of the communities that I've been part of for many years already adopt things like infrastructure as code, understanding a little bit more about how to configuration management, and then Kubernetes itself is I'm not going to say Kubernetes is easy, but it does allow us to automate a lot of that stuff away that maybe we have to look after a little bit more in the virtualization world and in the cloud space, and definitely in the physical data center. So yeah, I think we're being forced to have a broader knowledge. And one of the things I say is about the jack of all trades. And if anyone goes and looks up the proper saying of a jack of all trades, a master of none, but I can't remember what the last bit is, but I'll work it out.
I didn't know there was a second part, so I'll have to look. That's your project, everybody who's listening. Go look up the second half of that phrase. Everybody knows the first half.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about containers and Kubernetes. For folks who may not be familiar or just getting started on this journey, can you describe a little bit about what that is and how it kind of fits in with the evolution of what we've been doing in computing and technology for basically decades at this point?
Yeah, I think the first thing to touch on is Kubernetes for the if you're brand new, let's say you've been working in virtualization for the last 15, 20 years, maybe physical machines before that, Kubernetes comes along and it's like, oh no, that's for developers. That's not for me. I'm not a developer. I think what we have to think about is Kubernetes is based on compute, storage, and networking. Exactly the same as what we see in the other platforms that I previously just mentioned, what we saw with cloud, and how it's ultimately we're looking at abstraction layers. When we had physical machines, we had a whole compute, storage, and networking maybe in one box. Then we have obviously shared networking, shared storage, but we had one server that did one job. Potentially, we tried to cram loads of stuff on it. Virtualization came along and allowed us to take that cramming of all the stuff and segregate that and abstract away that the physical compute resources and enable us to have virtual machines. And then we started to have things like high availability and orchestration of VMs, basically with the likes of VMware, vSphere, Virtual Center, and it allows us to have that high availability of fault tolerance and all the good stuff that you need in that infrastructure. Along comes cloud, and we abstract away some of the manageability of maybe the underpinning hardware, maybe it's even the operating system of that machine, right? It's all about abstraction. We're taking it away, but we're paying for it in some way, whether we're paying for it with cold cash or whether we're paying for it in time and effort.
Yeah.
Or responsibility as well, and offloading that off. So there's obviously the abstraction is great, but if you need the abstraction, then you're not going to don't give it away. Don't pay for someone else to do it.
Right.
Things like databases as a service in the cloud, you can absolutely go and do that. Roll your own AWS RDS, but you're not going to have access to a lot of the features and functionality within the operating system to tweak memory, to tweak the underpinning. Whereas a DBA might want to tweak those little bits that make their database work as they see fit. And if that's the case, then maybe you still want a virtual machine or a physical machine running your database so that you can make that happen. But obviously, and then you've got SaaS-based workloads, which completely takes away a lot of the abstraction in terms of I can just consume Microsoft 365. I just want my email. And yeah, okay, there's some administration over users and authentication, but generally speaking, there's not much. I don't have to no longer babysit an Exchange server like I did 25 years ago. Exactly.
25 years ago was that? Yeah, it was Exchange 4.0, I guess, wasn't it? It was basically just
and it's
glorified
amazing
MS
though
mail.
when we talk about things like Exchange, I think there was an Exchange 2000, Exchange 2004, yes. Exchange 2007. That's a long time. Like we're in 2023 now, Eric. That scares me.
It makes me feel old too.
But to go back to like what is Kubernetes, what is containerization, it just and the simplistic way of putting it is Kubernetes is made up of compute, storage, and networking. It is the orchestration for containers as well, in that within Kubernetes, we have a control plane, and then we have the concept of worker nodes as our let's think of them as our hosts, our ESXi hosts within our vSphere environment. And the control plane is our virtual center. Virtual center is orchestrating our virtual machines. Our control plane is orchestrating our containers. Which then, once you start, and I did a good set. I did what seemed to be a well-received session at Veeam. I got good yes, feedback for it. So, and it was Kubernetes for the virtualization admin. So a lot of the things that we've learned over the years around high availability and fault tolerance and what an ESXi host is, what networking looks like, and all of that good stuff, shared storage, and all of the bells and whistles that we now have within vSphere. But Eric, you will remember a day where vSphere wasn't so kind and easy to set up. You'll remember the days where we have to go into a command line and we would have to configure things in a not so nice UI that we have today from VMware or from maybe Hyper-V was always relatively UI based.
It still had some PowerShell stuff in there.
But exactly that.
It was not pretty in its first iterations. No.
And I think so. I go back to before I came to Veeam, and even before like distribution and so forth around that, is that I go back to consulting days where I was being billed out for anything between 1,000 to 1,500 pounds a day, where I'm just building out a 3-node cluster of VMware. Now I'd be embarrassed. You'd be embarrassed to take that.
Oh, I know. I used to bill 4 hours to install Windows and put the hardware together and install Windows NT on a server by disk, and it was just like, first off, when all that changed, changed your billing structure, but now you're doing so many better things on the end. I wanted to get back to your session that you did. I'm hoping that one was recorded. I assume it was. I can't imagine they'd have you on the stage and not record it, because I think that would be a great one for folks that are looking to know that this is coming and want to make the pivot or enhance their skills beyond what they're doing today. So I'll look for that. Maybe I can put a link out, and when I put this out and share it, because I think that is a great way to start, because that's one of the first things we get asked by a lot of people when we start talking about these things is they're interested, but they don't know where to start to get those skills that they need. Understanding that the way you just talked, they have a lot of the foundational skills because they're already dealing with the big 3 pieces that go together with it. It's just like learning another language. You already know what nouns, verbs, and adjectives are. Now you just need to know how to put them together in another language.
And exactly that. And obviously they couldn't call them the same thing. They couldn't call worker nodes hosts, and they couldn't call control plane a vCenter and I think for good measure as well is that obviously VMware are the company behind virtualization, or the company behind VMware, and what we see, especially from a Veeam perspective, like a large percentage of our customer base are VMware customers as well. Makes sense with what we did there as well, and that will nicely lead us into why K10 was bought versus built. But before we get into that, is that Kubernetes doesn't belong to anyone. Yes, it was Google's. Google donated that to the Open Source Foundation, the CNCF, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. And then that opened up the door to everyone having a piece to play in that and being able to air their opinions, submit their PR, pull requests, and make their own changes. So now it is truly a community-led or an industry-wide led initiative. Now, VMware have a closed door on what they were doing around virtualization. Kubernetes is really an open source bit of kit, and think of it as like the cloud operating system. We can run Kubernetes pretty much anywhere. We can choose to run managed Kubernetes services in AWS and Azure and Google, and they all have little variations to that. We can choose to run it on-prem. We can choose to run it on vSphere. vSphere have Tanzu, or we might use a supported model, and all of these can be paid for options or free and open source. We can go and build our own Kubernetes cluster on bare metal if we want. We could then use something like OpenShift. You can see that there's many different Kubernetes distributions out there, and that gives us a lot of freedom of choice as to what and where we run those workloads.
But the awesome thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have with Kubernetes versus like virtualization, like I can't take a VMDK and run it without doing some process on it on Hyper-V or AHV. But with Kubernetes, I code once, and because that's a shared, it's a shared code base, that same code that I've created will run on OpenShift. It'll run on AKS, EKS. Correct me if I'm wrong, though.
Yeah, so 99%, absolutely. Now, if
Yeah.
you start building a custom application that is leveraging a lot of those customized concepts within EKS, for example, there's a lot of, they're the differences between each of those public clouds, but under the hood, it's mostly only that it is Kubernetes. So yes, 99% of the time, yes, that application is completely mobile between the different clouds, but there are going to be intricacies that are potentially different. For example, storage classes look different between Azure and AWS. Gotcha. Now, that's where K10 comes in, and that's where a lot of our conversations start, actually, is around the application mobility story, around being able to lift and shift and help with that migration between one cluster to another. Maybe we started off on-prem, and now we want to go into the public cloud, or maybe vice versa. We're seeing that as well. And we can orchestrate that. We can transform what that application has to look like versus you having to do it all in code and making it happen as well. Because generally speaking, the people that are now responsible for that data aren't developers. Like maybe that application developer that created this code and supplied it off the shelf is no longer at the company working on something else, not
whether a contract or something. Yeah,
exactly that. So now it's down to the infrastructure admin, the ops guys, the ops people to be able to then keep this alive and move it and scale it as accordingly. So that's a big part of Kasten K10. I know we've massively just jumped into one of the
no, but I think we should jump into
well,
it.
Yeah.
So that's something that when we talk about the evolution of this, like when containers started, they were supposed to be an ethereal, create and delete, no damage done, scale up and scale down as needed for your workload. Everything was the same. Nothing was stored in it. Then all of a sudden, data started getting stored in it because of storage drivers.
Yeah.
The CSI driver.
Yeah, so there's a bit of an evolution around storage within Kubernetes, and those that have kept a close ear to the ground around Kubernetes and storage and stateful workloads, you would have definitely heard stateless versus stateful, and that's absolutely right. Back in the day, I want to say 6-7 years ago, Kubernetes was very much for that stateless workload, and that's great, right? Think about a stateless workload though. That will be a website, static web server that is literally just going to serve up your web page. As soon as you wanted to start putting any authentication into that, any cataloging, any stateful persistence into that, then it's either using a monolith database external to your Kubernetes cluster. Fine, we have customers doing that today. Or they're using a PaaS-based service such as RDS as well. Or you turn that monolith database into a microservice itself and then take advantage of the scalability of that. And I think that's a big thing that's also changing right now, is that before we had to choose, are you using SQL or NoSQL? Let's just say SQL, for example.
Mhm.
And then whatever we do within that business, we're going to use SQL. We're stuck with that particular SQL distribution that we chose. Maybe it was Microsoft SQL, maybe it was MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, all of those different variants. But we generally didn't go, I'm going to have a Postgres database server here, I'm going to have a MySQL for this one, I'm going to have this for this, and I'm going to have that for that. What opens up the door to let's use the right database for the right job now and scale it accordingly for that particular microservice, is that we can spin up multiple copies or multiple different databases that are the right sort of database that should be used for that particular aspect of that authentication model, or from that storing critical information into a database. So I'm seeing this like micro database service or microservices around databases. There's no good name for it, but this is definitely a thing. People are pushing their data, and I'm just talking about databases, but actually there's a much broader data services story when you start thinking about things like message queues, batch processing, all the other, like anything, even observability. How important is that information around like login and understanding what's happening within your
security auditing. Yeah, you can't have that. Most industries can't have that information disappear just because the container disappeared.
So, and then that leads us on to, okay, so you got all of this data and these data services. Okay, how do we protect that? And we're back to where we were when Veeam started 16 years ago, and virtualization was just coming on the scene, that new cool kid. And all of the Veeam competition were going, I'm going to stick an agent on them virtual machines and we'll be good to go. We don't have to innovate here. And Veeam went, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem like the right way. We're gonna hook directly into the vSphere API. We're going to be fast, efficient, and agentless. And the big ticket win there was, well, you now don't have to look after the hundreds of agents for not only the operating system, but the applications that are sat on those virtual machines. Fast forward to Kubernetes, and what K10 has done there is K10 becomes part of that Kubernetes API as part of the deployment. So we don't care where we're deployed. So whether it's on a particular, like whether it's OpenShift, whether it's EKS, AKS, GKE, the long list continues. But we don't care. We become part of that. You can't use, say, Veeam backup replication for that to capture your Kubernetes cluster, because you're going to miss such of the artifacts that make up that application inside the Kubernetes cluster, which is why we had to consider what we did in this space as we see the ramp up continue and even get faster as we are now.
And it's funny because I mentioned earlier I'd been doing the CKA training, and what they considered backup of containers and your information for that, what they considered backup for it, just I saw the light of, I knew why it was valuable, but in doing what they say considered was backup, I saw the light of why this is so important, because it doesn't do what you need it to do, bottom line. And that was just, I was like, wow, now I really get why we need to be backing up and really paying attention to this data, because by default, nothing is paying attention to the data.
Yeah, and I think so. There's a few things to drill down on there, Eric. Is firstly, yes. So there's native things that we can do to create a backup, and I'm using air quotes. I know everyone can't see me, but that's going to involve you writing some level of script and then keeping that up to date, and you're then the orchestration engine to that. So that's great. You could do that in VMware as well. Like write some script that triggers some sort of VADP of XYZ UUID of a virtual machine and hope for the best. And that's going to export that. And you could use something like rcopy or something to move that copy of data from A to B. And maybe that's a backup. Restore will be a very different story. You've probably got to write another orchestration piece for that. So
And then
there
that
are
person leaves and you're sunk because you have no idea how they
native,
scripted this to work in the first place.
so exactly that. And don't get me wrong, there's open source tools out there that enable you to do some of this in a little bit more of an orchestrated way. But just the way that K10 simplifies this, and again, our teams are getting smaller. We're having to do more with less. We're now looking after not just a virtualization environment. We're now looking after probably some SaaS, probably some cloud, now probably some Kubernetes. We have to look after all of this. And that's why I just want to hit the easy button, especially when it comes to data. I don't want to have to worry about it. I just need to know that it comes back, right? So on top of that is, okay, how do I then move? Okay, like so Eric, to your example earlier, let's say that I'm on premises and I want to go to AKS. I want to go into Azure. I'll try and pick on every cloud and be the Switzerland rather than favoring any in particular. But so in order, I could do that potentially, kind of using scripts and some level of bash scripts, like automation, but it won't be fully orchestrated. It's going to cause downtime. We're going to have there's a lot of things to consider when you're moving, especially a large microservice application. I mean, if you're just moving one container, that's a different story. That's the easy part. When you start getting the complex microservices that are very much out there, that becomes a very difficult thing to change. I've mentioned storage classes as one example, and you'll see we do loads of demos on that because it's the easy one to show. But think about, basically we can transform what that whole application looks like, whether it's scalability, whether it's ingress, whether it's the storage, whether it's running a particular container version or version of a particular service. We can make all those changes on the fly as we recover that or import that into another cluster. So I think that's another thing to consider. And then finally, probably the biggest one of all, like I just mentioned around the databases. And I appreciate that not everyone is okay with throwing all of their data into Kubernetes, especially if you aren't skilled up on Kubernetes, or you're maybe don't have all the trust you can in Kubernetes. So you want to stick with that VM model, or maybe even that PaaS based model. So what K10 can actually do as well, and I know we've got Veeam backup for cloud products that do this as well, but we're thinking about the application within the cloud native space. We have to think about the whole picture. So yes, I might be running some stateless workload within Kubernetes, but that stateless workload, like I mentioned before, for authentication, for stock, for catalogs, for blah, 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 whatever that might be, is leveraging a database or a data service external to that cluster. So I want to be able to protect all of them at the same time so that when I restore, they're all going to look the same when they come back. They're consistent. So there's two elements to that. Is one, we can back up stuff that's outside of the cluster. So an RDS instance, for example, being used by that application. And then secondly, being able to do that in an application consistent way. Again, these databases are the same as what we've used for the last, 70 years. A database still has moving transactions. And if you decide to take a backup and then transactions are still running, then I guarantee you will lose some of those transactions. You won't be able to get a clean copy of that data, which is why we have to think about consistency. If you're familiar with Veeam, you know that we've worked very hard on like VSS and consistency from a virtual machine point of view. Exactly the same when it comes to Kubernetes, or exactly the same when it comes to cloud-based PaaS models as well. So we have that capability in an open source project that we maintain called Canister, which is built into K10 as well, that enables us to do that. So we have two ways of being able to protect data outside of the cluster, which other open source tools and other projects don't have out there in the wild, as well as that application consistency, which is why K10 is just that bit further ahead when it comes to protecting these workloads within Kubernetes.
And that's the brilliant piece is that it is looking at it holistically, not just, again, no, go into a meeting where you're doing recovery and say, well, but the containers are up. Database wasn't my problem. It's everybody's problem if the app's not running, and that's really what you have to look at.
Yeah, I think, Eric, to double down on that is I'm seeing more and more, like, just so I get to go to KubeCon. KubeCon's the kind of biannual. We have two KubeCons each year. Actually, there's a third this year, one in China. But generally speaking, early in the year, so April time, we have KubeCon Europe. Then there'll be KubeCon China, I think around August, September time. And then October, November time will be KubeCon North America, and that's going to be in Chicago this year. And I've been going for a couple of years now, and it started off developers. Developers do not care about backup. They see, in fact, developers don't care about storage. They see the database as the storage, which is no different. Me and Eric can go on for hours talking about the iceberg underneath that, like the
Yes.
storage layers, the LUNs, the NFS shares, the snapshotting, the bells and whistles around different storage arrays and what you have available to you around fiber channel, HBAs, and all of that good stuff, right? But a developer doesn't care about backup. So
Right.
them first couple of KubeCons were very much like, it was great for our engineering team because our engineering team are also there on the booth and they're talking to other developers about how they're developing microservices apps, because K10 is a microservice.
Yes.
Fast forward to that, we just had KubeCon in Amsterdam this year, and we're starting to see like existing Veeam customers come and have a chat with us. Oh, it's not day 2 though; it's day 28, and we've deployed this application into Kubernetes. Now I'm responsible for all that data in our whole environment. I need to make sure that that's protected. And then in between that, we started to see platform engineering, like just some sort of name that has been given now to the new sysadmin, if you will, like the sysadmin that has to look after everything. Let's call them a platform engineer now, and you'll get a pay rise and a nice new fancy title. All good, but your responsibilities are going to be the same. The data responsibility is still going to reside there generally. So yeah, that's just an interesting evolution that I'm seeing as well out there in the field.
That's interesting to hear and great to hear, because again, the audience for this is a lot of our traditional partners who are data center centric. So data center folks, this is coming into your scope and your territory. It's another opportunity for you to expand your skill set as well. The data center is never going to go away, just like tape is never going to go away. We've been talking about the demise of tape for decades, but it's the same thing. Traditional data center is never going to go away, but here's another set of skills to get yourself up to speed on, because you're going to have a responsibility for it. Just because you don't code it doesn't mean you're not going to be involved in it. You didn't code Exchange either, yet you back it up every day.
Yeah, and I think those concepts, Eric, are exactly the same, right? So once you get over the fundamentals of, or the foundations of Kubernetes and what it does, ultimately it's a platform that enables us to run an application or a set of applications, whether that be a database or whether that be a web server, exactly the same as what we see in virtualization today and cloud and everywhere else. And none of them are going away. I'll double down on that as well a little bit, Eric, because it infuriated me when I started learning this and I was seeing containers versus VMs everywhere. If you do a Google search, if everyone does a Google or a Bing search of containers and VMs, at least the first 2 pages comes up as containers versus VMs, and they were never a versus. They should never be a versus. They are very complementary. But equally, virtual machines aren't going away, and containers are just going to enable us to do more and maybe a little bit quicker. But VMs aren't going away, that's for sure. Like physical machines never went away,
Right.
like tape never went away. Now, going back to the backup concepts, again, I'll just say that application, that database is still a database. It's probably got some pretty important data on there. So we have to consider how can we achieve that 3-2-1 rule. Like, I would love to say that Veeam coined this 3-2-1 rule. It wasn't. It was a photographer that said about keeping copies of data,
Yep.
photos, or at least
The negatives and
film, in multiple locations and different copies of that. But that same concept applies for Kubernetes. Kubernetes is great, and it will keep your container, your application up and running, and it will spread that over a bunch of worker nodes, but one thing it will not do is protect that data. Like the cloud, it will not protect your data. Like virtual machines in VMware or in Hyper-V, it doesn't protect your data. That's your responsibility, regardless if you're in a managed service or whether you're in a whether you've rolled your own. The
Yep.
data is important. Like that's going to be again that concept doesn't change. I've done
No.
3-2-1 sessions over there, and it
You're
reads
right.
the same.
Platforms are availability. Data and then data integrity has nothing to do with platform availability. That is the end consumer or department or the operations team's responsibility. Nobody's providing that unless you sign up for an extra service. Nobody's providing that by default.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a couple things I wanted to circle back because you were talking about using K10 for migrations, and there was a great story about how we used that for migrations for a company over in Europe that was looking to do what was going to be a rather large migration. It wasn't even going from like on-prem to AKS or EKS. They were just looking to switch versions of the same platform, and the number of hours that this saved. If you can give a little info on that, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So when we talk about mobility means, and this is across the whole Veeam portfolio, right? We've spoken about, well, in fact, there's been iterations of this. I remember speaking about portability of data years ago, about how we could take a virtual machine and send it to EC2 and things like that. When it comes to Kubernetes, like that mobility could mean like actual recovery, it could mean migration, it could mean cloning, it could be just a test and dev. I just want a copy of that data and I want to clone that and I want to use it and then I want to throw it in the bin. And it could be as simple as, okay, if I've got 100, let's say I've got 100 worker nodes. So I've got 100 node cluster and I'm running on Kubernetes version 1.21. Do I really want to manually go through and update all of those 100 nodes? Or would it be actually more efficient for me to just restore my whole workload into a brand new cluster and then delete the old cluster thereafter? So that's another way of being able to kind of automate and orchestrate away the burden of updating infrastructure and having that overhead of having to do that. So it doesn't necessarily mean to be I'm going from on-prem to cloud because of size, space, etc., speed, scale. But it could be that I just want to get onto version 1.2.2 or one of the 1.2.6, which 1.2.7, which is the latest one now. So and we've got some amazing customers that are doing some pretty incredible things. Yeah. Another one in Europe actually is how they're using. So they're an AI. Oh, everyone's an AI company at the moment. They're a machine learning company. So basically, they are they're using K10 in the data science group, and what they're doing is we're Kasten K10 is being used to protect their model, and then they're running that against their data sets. So we can clone that several times that then hits the model. So
wow,
it's not just backup anymore, which
is kind of funny for Veeam too, because that's it's not just backups and it's data. It's using that data to more than just for restoring too.
With this? Like,
more,
again,
with the same data.
Yeah, if I go back to my thing like 4 years ago, my focus was about leveraging data. How can we do more with that? How do we enhance like things like data labs? And this, it hasn't changed. Like there's still that passion to extend what the Veeam what the Veeam platform has to offer there.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up too, because we had an example locally to me of a K10 deal where we were talking to a company and they said, yes, we're definitely interested, but it's a next year purchase because we're still in development right now. And again, like you said earlier, developers don't care about backup. We got a call 2 weeks later saying we need this now. We lost all of our data in our dev environment, and we've ground to a halt. We can't recover it. We realize now what we had to do. We had to basically start over again with the entire dev testing and everything. So they ended up buying it in development to cover the dev. Now the nice thing is you buy it in development. Guess what you do? You get it perfect there. There's ways, now you can migrate things to production. You can test. You could, if you need to start scaling or testing things, you restore production back to a dev environment, same as we do, like you said, with virtual labs and data labs right now. We can, you need to test patches and updates and hot fixes. You can easily do that.
Yeah, I should put an asterisk on that. Developers don't care about backup
Until
they lose data. Or the other one that I spoke to someone, and this wasn't an existing, they're not a customer, but they were saying about how they, as a dev, if they need to do something, if they need to understand something about the data set, the database that they've got, they just hook into the production database.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, right. And you work for
you bet.
Massive company. I was like, yeah, you probably shouldn't. Like, how about use, like, I can write you a script. It seems easier, and I would feel like I use their service. I feel like it would be better if I write you a script on how you could clone that natively using Kubernetes tools, or use us, and we could do it. But yeah, this sort of stuff happens, and anyone that is familiar with with the database, especially SQL, it's very easy to drop databases accidentally. Just make a mess of it, encrypt it, make a mess.
Yeah. And you're not a very popular person at that point. It's like get that database
100%.
recovered and then get to the exit. Yeah. And it's interesting, that the thought process of dev backup versus not. I'm glad to see that people are starting to get their heads wrapped around how important this is. Now, from the partner side, these conversations are pretty new. If I'm a partner and I'm going into meetings, first off, who should I be talking to? We talked about platform engineers. If I was going through and searching for the right people to try and talk to, I'm guessing it's not the same traditional data center backup operators and directors of data center that we were talking to.
I actually think it depends. I think it will be. I think at the moment, maybe developers have a bit more percentage on, they're potentially taking the credit card, they're spinning up these clusters, they're using it to deploy. But slowly and surely, it's heading back to the traditional, and I'm using air quotes to not offend, but it's landing on the sysadmin, it's landing on the infrastructure admin. So it really depends, and I think that's shown from a Kasten point of view. If we speak to our sales guys, if you speak to Veeam sales guys, it all depends. I would not rule it out as a complete. This is not a complete different persona conversation in all aspects, and I think the further down the line we get, and the further away from. Just to put another analogy on, like at the moment, I feel like we're very much at Kubernetes 1.27, which is the latest release, is around that ESXi or ESX 3.5 day. And I feel like as soon as we take away and we simplify some of the complexities that we have within Kubernetes, the deployment, the UI, is there going to be a UI, a dashboard, or something around that? Then I feel like the sysadmin group, the operations teams, will take more of a responsibility about deploying and looking after what that looks like. So that'll be more of the people that are in the data center today. It'll be us that have to look after this stuff versus this new persona. I don't think that's happening. I think we're evolving. The sysadmin is evolving to be more DevOps, more platform engineering focused anyway. And I think the developer needs to concentrate on developing versus trying to spin up things that they potentially don't always get involved in around compute, storage, and networking.
That makes sense. I was just going to say, it's like it would be like in the old days if they were going out and procuring and sizing switches, routers, servers, and storage arrays for their app. They never did that in the past. They just said what kind of resources they need, and then the team goes out to get the best things. The proper people go get the hardware for them. So it's not really different. It's just that it's all mostly digital at this point. You're not really touching those things. But again, you get down enough layers, depending on where you are, you're still plugging things in. I mean, it's the old, the cloud's just somebody else's computer. It's like in a lot of cases, it's just, containers are things running in the cloud on somebody else's computer, or in your on your own prem in somebody else's computer that's managing it, depending on what you're doing. So it's interesting to hear that it's kind of coming back that way, because it's always been, when we've been out in the field talking about it, is get to the DevOps guys. You're going to have to break out of your talking to the people you're comfortable talking to. So it's interesting to hear that you're seeing it coming back to those people they're talking to. So it sounds like kind of keep talking about it to that group, and get them to make introductions so that you can start talking about what's coming down the pike, because maybe they're doing development. And, sometimes the data center ops team is the last to find out about it until it's dropped on their lap too. So they don't even know. So it's also not only talking at that level, but talking up a level or two, which is something we should all be striving to do anyway, to find out what is the strategy for the company, not just what's going on today, but what's going on in 3 to 5 years. Where do you see things going? And I think that's a valuable conversation to have.
Yeah, I think there's that element, and you'll know the companies that are doing this. I think we're still in that awareness phase. Awareness of this is a thing. There's billions of dollars been plowed into Kubernetes. It's not going the way of OpenStack or anything like that we've seen before. I think we're on 7 years of Kubernetes, or maybe even 8 now.
Something like that, 7 or 8. Yeah.
And like the amount of investment from major tech companies, just financial companies, it's not going away, and it's definitely coming as a first class. You don't need to listen to this to get that. Like, you can go and look at the CNCF survey year on year, and you can see the growth that they're seeing in people adopting this as well. Yeah, I think we're definitely in that awareness phase. I mean, if you don't know what you don't know what you don't know. So if you choose to build a project and you only know virtualization or physical, then guess where the infrastructure is going to lie for that? It's going to go there, right?
Sure.
If you know about cloud, if you know about a SaaS option, if you know about Kubernetes, then that opens up the door to choose the right horse for the race.
Mm-hmm.
And the more horses that you've got in the race, you're going to win, right? You're going to pick the right one. So, I'm a proponent for Kubernetes, but I equally, like, you're not going to convince me to start moving a monolith application into Kubernetes and start protecting it just because Kubernetes is cool. No, that's not the answer.
That's skipping a step, because really, if you have a large monolithic app like that, you should be trying to break it down to see how you can make it, in essence, services, or serverless or microservices. How can you break it down so it's not that gigantic app anymore?
Exactly that. And that might be starting actually upside down with the database, or at least what I've seen. So that monolith to container, there's no nice P to V that we saw from a physical to virtual. There's a re-architecture that needs to happen, and that is happening. But also, developers and operations teams don't have the skill sets to get into that as well. So,
but I know people are looking for cheats, because I've seen things online like, can you run Windows in a Kubernetes container? And usually the first answer after that is, why would you want to? But that's probably what they're trying to get at, is I want to take this big app and be able to say it's container based now, but it's still the same big app. There's a step. And again, that's with cloud too. I mean, we've seen it. And that's part of the reason that a lot of companies, I think, still spend more money than they planned in the cloud, is they just took their physical or their VMs from on-prem, shifted them up, and they're paying a ton for them. They didn't do that rewrite to take advantage of the efficiencies that you can get from going into different architectures.
Yeah, exactly that. Just to touch on that as well, around, a lot of people, and rightly so, the pandemic hit, the 4 walls of the data center got blown apart. We had to then service all of our employees, regardless of how many hundreds, tens, hundreds, thousands that might have been. we were now leveraging the internet well and truly out there. Like the home network was now an extension of our data center. So we saw a load of people move their lift and shift virtual machines, physical machines into the cloud. And now we're seeing so much about FinOps, or think about cloud costs. I actually just put something up on LinkedIn this week, an article that I wrote about Kubernetes cost management, and I've got some other broader cost optimization stuff that I'm writing at the moment as well. Because okay, if that you might have that massive bill that says, oh, that's gonna break the bank a bit, and that's a reason, a strategy to bring it all back on premises. And it might be your offices might be full of people again. That might be great. But I would not be down and out on the cloud. It just means that you haven't leveraged it the way it should be leveraged.
Yes.
Because like I was saying about, do you really need the full control of a EC2 instance on AWS? I've mentioned both now. Or can I offload that to a database as a service or a PaaS-based offering, and the same for files and the same for other areas of my business? Can I offload and abstract and re-architect that away? Because I think whenever we look at the term like re-architect or re-platform, I think that there's an alarm bell that goes off especially in my, at least in my head to begin with, Eric. That alarm bell goes off and goes, well, that sounds like hard work. But actually, when we think about it, all we're doing, that database migration has to happen. And I'm not saying you're going from Microsoft SQL Server to Postgres. I'm saying go from Microsoft SQL Server to Microsoft SQL Server. The only thing you're offloading is having to manage, ultimately, the agent, the operating system of that system. Yeah. If you don't need to, take it away and pay for that service to happen. So I think what we're going to see, I've seen some people bring a lot of those workloads back on-prem, but equally I'm seeing just as many, if not more, people re-architecting, re-platforming, taking advantage of the cloud and the cloud-based services, and not just using it as a nice way of broadening the internet capability or the bandwidth and the scalability.
Expanding the walls of your data center without having to expand the walls of your data center.
Exactly.
And doing the same things. You can't keep doing the same things. But that goes back to that education and constantly learning and updating your skills, which is always important. And you're a great example of that, because, I mean, just the conversations we've had and what I know you've done. I've been with Veeam now for over 4.5 years, and what I knew you for doing when I started versus what I know you for doing now is so different. It's just another way of saying never stop learning, which is one of my mottos that I give. Everybody asks the question all the time, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self? That's my advice to anybody that's out there. Never stop learning.
Yeah, you have to. Like, whether you're a sysadmin, whether you're an infrastructure admin, whether you're anywhere, just keep. And we have so much content out there, and I just mean the community. Mm-hmm. You just have to go. Like, YouTube is a great resource. I'm completely addicted to it since the pandemic. Free resources. There is no reason why you can't learn something. Like, go and learn a little bit more about Terraform, for example, and that's nothing to do with Veeam, apart from you could use it to deploy your stuff. But go and learn what it does, and I guarantee it will save something within your business. As in, it will save you some time more than anything.
I really appreciate you taking the time today to have this chat. It's always great to speak with you, and this has been a great conversation, and it's a little different than a lot of the conversations we have, because usually they're very traditional. There's that word again, Veeam centric type conversations. So this was nice to have a different conversation, but one that I think that everybody needs to hear. So thank you for doing this with me today.
No worries, Eric. Looking forward to coming back and making it more Veeam heavy around Kasten when we're seeing a load more out there.
This has been Veeam Partner Perspectives with Eric Doherty.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.